Hello, friends. Lee C. Camp here. You're listening to No Small Endeavor. This is our unabridged interview with Max Lucado. Max Lucado is one of the world's best-selling authors. He has something like 150 million products in print. He's written more than 40, maybe 45, 46, I think he said, adult nonfiction books, along with lots of other commentaries, children's books, and so forth. He's a highly prolific writer who's been very intentional about telling stories well and writing as a lifetime discipline, and a great corpus of published work to show for it. Max and I come from the same background, Christian tribe, if you will, but we'd never met one another, and it was a really delightful time to get to spend with Max. I'm always fascinated to explore what has led someone to focus on the things they focus on, and we got to do that with Max, and I was grateful to get to explore his life and some of the things that have led him to focus on the things that have been so prominent in his work. And then finally, we talked about his newest book called Tame Your Thoughts. So here's our conversation with Max Lucado. Got to sit down with him a good long while, so this unabridged version is a bit longer than a lot of them are. And I hope you enjoy this conversation with Max. Max Lucado has been dubbed America's pastor by Christianity Today, the best preacher in America by Reader's Digest, and the Ted Lasso of pastors by the Dallas Morning News. With more than 150 million products in print, Max Lucado has penned more than 40 works of adult nonfiction, standing alongside dozens and dozens of best-selling children's books, gift books, Bible studies, commentaries, and collections. His books have been published in 56 languages worldwide and regularly appear on bestseller lists, including the New York Times, Publishers Weekly, and USA Today. Welcome, Max.
Well, thank you. What a kind introduction.
Yeah, well, pleased to have you with us.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. We've known a lot of different people in common through the years, but I think this is our first time to get to meet one another, so I'm grateful to get to.
We know a lot of good folks that we share friendships with.
Pleased to get to spend time with you today.
Thank you.
So thank you. You grew up in a small town in West Texas?
I did, yeah. My father was an oil field worker. He was one of 9 kids, and he was raised in West Texas. And all his brothers were able to get jobs with the Santa Fe Railroad and ended up in California. But Dad was colorblind, and they wouldn't hire him. And so he was able to get on with Exxon, which turned out to be a great move. He was an oil field worker, literally digging ditches to lay pipe. And that's how he started. And that ended up keeping us in West Texas for all of his life.
Yeah. When you think back about your time in West Texas, what kind of stands out to you as things that you took with you for good?
Yeah. West Texas is not famous for being geographically beautiful, right? And so oftentimes people will say it's not that pretty, but the people are great. That's the phrase you hear over and over and over again, and that's really true. There is a sense of community, I think, among the West Texans. It's a ranching / football / oil area, and football's huge and ranching's big, and a lot of the kids with whom I was raised were rodeoers. A lot of bull riding went on, so they're kind of hardy people, loyal people, and I think what I appreciated most living out there was that they ingrain a work ethic into or you don't make it, because the people in our little town were all blue collar, and we youngsters, teenagers, didn't have a lot. We had plenty, but if we had anything extra, we had to earn it ourselves. So most of us ended up working in the oil fields during the summers and at Christmas break. I hated it at the time, but looking back, it taught me to get myself out of bed early and try to do something constructive.
What about your mother? What are things that stand out to you still about
great question.
Your mother's influence on you?
Great question. My mom was a nurse. Both my parents were raised during the Depression. My dad was 40. I shouldn't say they were raised during the Depression. They were born in 1914, 1916, but they got married during the Depression. And that really shaped our lives because they were extremely frugal with everything. And when you ask about my mom, that's what I think of. I can actually remember going with her to the back to alley behind the grocery store where they had discarded vegetables like tomatoes and lettuce because they deemed them unworthy to put out in the produce section. And she would search through them and see if there wasn't anything good that she could take home for free. And I thought everyone did that, but she was extremely frugal. She'd grown up in a very, very poor home. She battled depression a lot during her life. We didn't know what to call it, but now I do. And Dad, on the other hand, was quite jovial, easygoing. Mom had some pretty wild mood swings, and so we had to learn to navigate that. And they provided for us so well. She worked as a nurse so that all four kids, I'm the youngest of four, could go to college. And so I'm forever grateful for her willingness to work and provide.
Yeah. How do you think those mood swings or her own navigating depression, how do you suspect that impacted you as a child?
To this day, if my wife takes on a particular tone and I'm 70 years old to this day, but if my wife says, Max, you forgot to pick up your clothes, that hits a nerve that is raw even all these years later, because my mom was so fastidious. And if we left anything lying around out of place, we could get it, pretty severely. And so I learned to walk on eggshells around her, and we could all sense when she came home in a particular mood, or she would let us know. She would come home and unleash a bit on us. And so learning to walk around that, and I wish so much that I had known to encourage her to go to get some help, some medicinal help or some therapeutic help. But that's just something you didn't do back in her day, especially. And so she lived with it, and we learned to live with her.
Yeah.
But I want to be clear, I love her.
Oh, sure.
Of course. Yeah.
When did you begin to have different language, like the language of depression, to frame that childhood experience?
Great point. Great question. And for me, that happened when my wife passed through a season of depression. So after I finished seminary, I moved to South America, where we lived for most of the 1980s. And that's when I began writing books. And I didn't realize that the books were doing as well. I was a bit removed from it, moved back to the States in 1988, and was able to get a position at a church in San Antonio, Texas, as the senior pastor. But I started getting all these speaking invitations. And so I thought, well, this is great. I'll go everywhere they ask me to go. It was a lot of fun for me. It wasn't fun for my wife, who at that time we had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. And off I would go on a Thursday and get back on Saturday night and then get up early and preach on Sunday. And I had no clue that she was spiraling. And she was seriously spiraling. And I came in one time, I was about 33 at the time. I came home from a trip, and she was lying on the floor in a fetal position. And she was just undone. She had exhausted. Her tank was beyond empty. I did not know what to do. And by God's great provision, our next door neighbor was a psychiatrist. And I went over and talked to him, and he said, I think we can help. And that led then to some good sessions and some learning lessons and some medicinal support. And so that's when I began to understand the language of clinical depression. I'm not a therapist, but I'm fascinated by the whole subject. But I try to be careful and not act like I understand it to the degree that people might assume. But I do think it's a challenging and major issue in our world today. And I came, firsthand with it with my mom. I did not know what was happening with her. But with my wife, we've watched that. And she's done great, by the way. Within a matter of months, her husband was off the road, staying home where he should be. I learned a huge lesson. And she kind of got balanced again. And
what would you say out of that experience in seeing that both with your mother and with your wife, what would be like your, I don't know, top 3 or 5 considerations for cultivation of good mental health?
I do think, well, in fact, the book we're going to discuss here in just a moment is called Tame Your Thoughts. And it has to do with this whole world of thought management. And I am a pastor, and I've realized that that's really what I'm helping people do. I'm urging them to be careful how they think. And to manage their thoughts in a way that doesn't lead to negative, toxic, quicksand seasons of life, and learning to recognize that. So I would say, first of all, acknowledge that much of mental health is managing thoughts. And then I would say, number 2, try to take inventory of your own thoughts. Is there a certain area that where you find yourself susceptible to a particular type of thought? For some, it might be greed. For some, it might be insecurity. For some, it might be inappropriate thinking about the opposite sex. There is, for all of us, a tendency to go a certain direction, and oftentimes this happens when we're tired and we're not paying attention. So I would challenge that person first to, I call it practice picky thinking, but then also identify that particular area where you find yourself. I mentioned the little secret wound I have from my mom, and it can be triggered. And now I know why it bugs me when I hear that particular tone. And okay, I just got pressed. We all have those hidden bruises in us that tend to get pressed. And so once you've taken inventory of your thoughts, then I think the third thing is to develop a response system for when those thoughts begin to surface. If a person is dealing often with, I've got to have more, and it's a sense of greed, probably that comes from an insecurity somewhere back in our lives that says, unless I have more, I'm not valuable. Try to identify where that comes from and develop some type of approach for managing those thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you. And as you said, we'll have some time to unpack some more of that from the new book here in a moment. The last thing, just about some of your childhood experience that you've been sharing. Years ago, I interviewed Kurt Thompson, the psychiatrist who also does a lot of theology work. And I remember so well, he kind of in a laughing way saying, I don't remember the percentage that he gave, but it's 75, 90% or something. He said 75% of the time, 90% of the time that you're having an argument with your spouse, you're arguing with your parents. And I just thought that it's so fascinating that the way we carry these childhood experiences with us, and unless we do a bit of unearthing,
yes, sir,
we don't realize that we're not necessarily dealing with the person in front of us,
right?
But dealing with these long wounds or these long sensitivities.
And they seem to happen when we're young, and if it's a parent or if it's an authority figure, when you're an adolescent, you hold them in such high esteem, right? For me, it might have been coaches. I was determined I was going to be a great football player, and those coaches can be harsh, but they were authority figures in my life. My brain was taking shape as an adolescent, and a lot of the things they said to me were very helpful. But when they would lash out and criticize us in front of the whole team, I mean, that'll stick with you for a long time.
What else were you like as a boy, a young man?
Well, I always loved books. Always did. Yeah, which is curious because I certainly wasn't raised in an academic or scholarly family, but I loved books.
What's some of your earliest memories of book reading?
Hanging out in a library, elementary school library, the middle school library, the public library in our little West Texas town. And my parents were so kind, and they would drop me off at the public library in the summer. And let me just stay in there, and I would literally read. I loved biographies, and I must have read 30 or 40 books every summer.
My earliest memory of reading books, I think, is walking back from first or second grade library in our school, having found a new biography that I was going to read, and I would read a whole bunch of those.
You were so excited.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was there a particular kind of book you?
Well, it was biography, like you were saying. Yeah, I think I just read a bunch of those when I was little.
Yeah.
And then when I was back home several weeks ago, first time I'd really spent much time in my hometown, one of the places I wanted to go to was our first public library,
Really?
that we had there in town.
Still
And
there.
it's a museum now, but just all of those memories come sweeping back from
Isn't it great?
beautiful space. Yes.
I was thinking, what a blessing that we have growing up in a country that has libraries.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many parts of the world where you don't have access to material, and this was absolutely free for anybody who wanted it.
Yeah.
And my parents took advantage of it, got me a library card, and that was like a adventure.
Yeah.
Walking into the library.
What else were you like? You loved books, loved reading.
I
What else
love
were you
books. By the time I was 15, that's when I started drinking, and that's when life began to come unraveled for me. I was raised in a church-going home, and I was raised in a teetotaler home. My dad did not allow any alcohol into the house because he was surrounded by siblings many of whom were alcoholics. And so he just said there'll be no drinking in our house. My brother battled alcoholism his entire life, except for his final 2 years. You would have loved my brother. Everybody did. He was just so easygoing and likable and lovable. But boy, that bottle just took him under. And so by the time I was about 15, he already knew the ways of securing the beer, and we keep working around the system. My dad not knowing about it, and so he tutored me. He mentored me, and I do not know if that alcoholism gene is in my system. But what I can recall with very vivid detail is the sensation I felt the first time I drank a beer. My buddies would say, well, I don't think I like that beer very much. And I would say, man, I don't know. It does something for me. And so I think it must be something. I must be susceptible to it. So by the time I was 15 years old, I was building my calendar around our parties and getting drunk. And my dad caught me at the age of 15. And this is really important. I loved my dad. I idolized him. And when I saw he came in, I was throwing up in the bathroom in the middle of the night. And I told him I got sick on Mexican food, and he knew better. And the next morning, he was so upset with me. And that's when I first, I think, Lee, started dealing with shame. Guilt. I like that expression that shame is self-hatred at my expense, S-H-A-M-E, because I just began to hate myself. And the spiral of hating yourself and then treating it with more alcohol is really ironic. It was alcohol that created it, but it was alcohol that could cover it up. And so I, as a teenager, was really dealing with the shame of not being able to control my drinking and dealing with the shame by drinking. There's the irony, right?
Yeah.
But that's the spiral that we get on. So I think I was a pretty decent guy otherwise. I played sports, and I made A's and B's. I ran for student council and got elected. So on one hand, I was really a pretty good kid, but I had this other part of my life, and I realized it's pretty easy to lead a dual life if you're sharp. And my brother and I figured it out, and so that was a tough season during those days.
So you mentioned a moment ago that you went to college and seminary, and then following those years, you and your wife became missionaries?
Missionaries, yes, sir.
Yeah, in Brazil.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. When you look back on those Brazil years, what are key takeaways for you, key lessons learned or key challenges navigated?
Yeah, I love Brazil. I love the people of Brazil. I love the culture. I love the food. I love Brazil. I love the language. I think it's a very lyrical language. I sometimes catch myself humming the Girl from Ipanema, in my head. We lived in Rio de Janeiro, and our kids were born in Rio. and I would speak each Sunday at the church. And so I really, for an old West Texas guy, I got pretty proficient in Portuguese. I know my accent was horrible, just horrible. It must have made them laugh. But I did get a decent vocabulary, because I would write out a sermon in English, and I would ask my Portuguese teacher to translate it, and then I would memorize it.
Oh, wow.
And so it was a little 15-minute message, but it forced me to grapple with vocabulary and memorize proper sentence structure. So anyway, I say all that to say I loved Brazil. Felt very much at home there. Theologically, Lee, it was huge for me. It was huge, because I went with a group of other guys to start a church, a missionary team. We rented a little storefront. We were all in our mid-20s, okay? Well, I know we felt old looking back. That's pretty young, right? And we were fresh out of seminary. And we were just convinced all we had to do was put a sign out, and all these Brazilians would come and hear these gringo boys. And nobody came. Nobody came. I mean, for a year or two, we'd have a trickle of guests. But by far and above, the vast majority of people in Sunday attendance were American missionaries. And so I think you'll appreciate this because of your heart for theology. We had to have a heart-to-heart with each other and say, why are people not coming? And we took time to read through, and I do not recall whose suggestion this was. Somebody said, let's make sure we're teaching the gospel. We're sharing good news. Let's study Galatians. And I guess somebody on the team was aware that there was a Galatians controversy, and it would help us to make sure we were teaching what the Apostle Paul taught. And so as we read through Galatians, Lee, we realized that we were teaching a bunch of rules and regulations. We were teaching behavior, not belief. And we were saying, come into our church and let us tell you how to lead a better life. Especially a bunch of gringo kids, right? Who's going to do that? And I'm making it simpler than it really was, but we realized that the death and the burial and the resurrection of Christ is really the great news. It's the great news that the church can share, that God sent his son to live on earth to die for our sins, but he rose from the dead as a picture and promise of our resurrection. And I guess we, with our seminary-trained brains, had never quite condensed the gospel down to a couple of phrases. And so we did. And we began to teach that. And we challenged ourselves. We're not going to teach anything other than that. And there's a famous phrase from Paul, I decided to know nothing among you except Christ and him crucified. Well, we made that kind of decision. And Lee, the little church began to grow. We doubled in a year, and then we doubled the next year. And so that's what I learned, that Brazil was much better for me than I was for Brazil. And if my theology and understanding of Scripture is in any way healthy, it's because of that time I spent in Brazil, needing to hone my thoughts and present them to people.
So you come back to the States, as you said a moment ago. Some of the books you'd already written are beginning to take off. Mm-hmm. The number of books you've published is quite incredible. 46, 7.
40, mid-40s.
Mid-40s, yeah.
It's easy if you just focus on quantity and don't worry about quality.
What is your rhythm of writing? What do your writing habits look like?
I love talking about writing, by the way. So tell me if I go too much detail on this, but I'm just fascinated by writing, and you and I both have a lifelong fascination with books. In high school and college, the subject that I loved was English, especially when English was more creative writing and literature than grammar. Mm-hmm. I could suffer through grammar, but I loved creative writing, and so. When I was in seminary, that's when I realized I like writing these papers. Everybody else is complaining, but give me an assignment, on the message of the book of Hebrews. I loved it. And so when we got to South America, I thought my first year in South America, I really had to focus on learning Portuguese. So I wasn't much used to the little church. And so you can only study a language for several hours a day, and then your brain fries. So I thought, I'm going to try to write a book And I had a devotional that I had kept of little ideas. And so I wrote these little 2 or 3 paragraph devotionals, and I cobbled together about 70 of them, little 1-page devotionals. And I put it together in a manuscript and sent it out to 15 different publishers. I got 14 rejections, but the 15th one said yes. That was in 1985, I think. It was the very year my first daughter was born, so it's been about 40 years. And that's not a very good book. I never recommend it. That first one, it's terrible. I don't even own a copy myself, I don't think. But it did open the door to the publishing world for me. And by the time that book was published, I had an idea for a second book. And I think it was a better book by far, and then a third book. And so by the time I left South America, the writing world, my assignment in the writing world had become clear. And I came to that church in San Antonio with that part of my job description. I met with the leaders of the church, and I said, I think I'm called to write. And so forgive me for taking so long to answer your very good question. So I had to create a rhythm of writing at that point. And I learned that if you put a little extra work on these sermons, they can become book chapters. And so I created every sermon series thinking it was a potential book. So nearly all of my books, including the one we'll talk about here in a minute, have come out of sermons that I've written for our church. And so I'll spend 3 months preparing a sermon series, and then I'll spend 3 or 4 months presenting those sermons, all the time doing, this is all overlapping from prior sermon series. And then I'll take 3 or 4 months and turn it into a book. And so the whole process takes me about a year.
Yeah. In very specific terms, do you write in the mornings? Do you write any time of day, or what's that look like?
I write on Tuesdays is meeting day, okay? And so I'll meet with anybody about anything, schedule permitting, on Tuesday. But I am very jealous about Monday and Wednesday and Thursday mornings, because that's my study time. And so I dedicate myself, and I'll start around 8 or 8:30 in the morning, and I'll study with a lunch break until mid-afternoon. And when I say study, I'm writing and studying. And I'll do that again on Wednesday, and then I'll do that again on Thursday morning. And I have found that 2.5 days, I can get a good first draft done for the sermon. Now I turn my sermons in several weeks in advance because I share the preaching responsibilities with another pastor. But for many, many years, I was the only pastor. And so my promise to our staff was to have a sermon to them by Thursday afternoon. And so that's why I made Thursday mornings my goal. Yeah. I think one key, just practical key, that I had the same editor for about 40 books, and she's wonderful, and she's retired now. But she would always challenge me to summarize the entire book in one sentence, and that was a great tool. What is the one promise, the big idea for this book? And then she would hold me to it. We're editing each chapter, saying, now, how does this chapter fulfill that promise you've made, that sentence that you've made about the book? And that was an extremely helpful tool.
Yeah. At what point did you start writing children's books?
Yeah. When I started having kids. And so when I came home every day and we had those 3 small girls, that there was kind of a passing of the baton. My wife was so happy to see me home. I've always loved kids, though, and I was excited, so we'd go bike riding or swimming or something, and then we would always have story time. And out of those stories, I started creating. Instead of just reading stories, we would make up our own stories. And that was a blast. And I wrote my first children's book out of a very story that I wrote for my kids called Just in Case You Ever Wonder. And I created this little limerick, I guess you'd call it, a little repetitive phrase, just in case you ever wonder, Your mom and dad will always be here. When you get afraid, when you go to school, if you can't go to sleep, just in case you ever wonder. And I would say it to them every night. And it was a nice little phrase. And so one morning, I was supposed to go preach, and I had turned out to be needed a root canal. And I had to call in a substitute. And I had a good friend at our church who was a dentist, and he hurried over and gave me something pretty heavy duty. I don't know what it was, but it knocked the pain out, but it didn't knock me out. And I thought, I'm going to see if I can turn that little phrase into a book. And that book is still out there. Huh. It's still doing great, just in case you ever wonder. So I sent it to my friend at back in those days, Word Publishing, Laura Minshew. She's still over the children's. She's over a lot more, but part of her division is still children's books, and she loved it and turned it into a book. So that's really how it started.
You Are Special? That was another kind of prominent one that you did early on, right?
That is my best-selling book of all time.
Really?
You Are Special.
Yeah.
And it's a story I wrote for my daughters. And it's about a little wooden village called Wemmicksville, and the people are Wemmicks. And what they do all day, every day, is walk around giving each other labels. They stick a star on you if you're good. They stick a dot on you if you're not. And poor little Punchinello had so many dots on him that every time he saw somebody, they'd just give him another dot. And he met one little wooden person who had no dots or stars. Her name was Lucia. And he asked her how it is that she has no stars or dots. And she said, well, every day I go see the maker. I go to Eli. And I go meet him, and I let him talk to me. And he said, I want to do that. So off he goes. And when he meets Eli, one of his dots falls to the ground. It's a real simple story. But I think it gains traction in this world in which everybody is comparing and grading and competing with one another. And so that little book, it's a part of the curriculum in China.
Yeah.
Because
really?
It's not a overtly scriptural book, right? I don't mention God in the book. I do have a symbol for God. So it can translate into a variety of cultures that might not appreciate a book otherwise. And so it's fun. It's a fun book.
So let me armchair psychologize just a moment.
Yes, sir.
And see how you react. And this is just occurring to me. So I hear you share, you've got this 15-year-old experience in which you began to deal with, realize your own shame or experience shame.
Yeah.
You've got a mother whom you deeply love, and yet at the same time you're realizing that you're having to walk on eggshells to make sure that you're okay. You're in Brazil, and you realize that you're proclaiming some sort of message that says you've got to be A, B, and C, and you realize that's not going to work. And that in all of those things, there's this sort of formation in you bubbling up where you become the Lucia. You're wanting the people around you to know you're loved, you're okay. There's grace. There's acceptance. How's that fit, Max Lucado, you think?
I think that's a brilliant analysis. I do. I don't think I've ever connected the dots in the way you just did. I do think the message of grace and forgiveness and acceptance by my Maker it warms my heart more than anything I've ever discovered, anything in my whole life. And I think that I am compelled to help people understand that they are accepted and beloved, cherished, designed, and built by their Maker. So I think what you're saying is, I wonder how much of our own message comes out of our own wounds. I wonder how much of my proclivity toward alcohol was coming out of my the messaging that I had heard, that the subtle messaging that said you're not doing a good job.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's a very, very fair analysis. Have you ever thought about going into psychotherapy?
So what sorts of, you sold 150 million books or 150 million pieces in print, something like that.
Yeah.
In what ways has the fame and celebrity of that, how's that impacted you?
I think I'll grade myself a B- on that. I would like to say that I've been oblivious to it, but I have not. The I'll tell you the things for which I'm very grateful and I'm thankful, and then the confession that it would be less than honest if I didn't share. I'm grateful that I'm 70 years old, and as far as I know, I've not embarrassed the gospel and the church, and that to me is a source of joy. I thank the Lord for that, because there's so many of my colleagues who have, in a public way, whether it be through financial or sexual scandal, brought embarrassment to the gospel, and that would just, Leah, that would devastate me. It would just devastate me. So for that, I'm grateful. I'm very, very grateful. On the other hand, the challenge of greed has followed me, and I appreciate your psychotherapy. Maybe my mother, her frugality and the depression has caused me. I'm sure I've inherited some of her hoarding instincts, although I don't hoard, but I do. I'd be less than honest if I didn't say I've found security in the financial benefits of 40, well, over 100 books in print when you count the children's books, and I'm not real proud of that. My wife is aggravatingly generous. She's always more giving. I say, honey, maybe we ought to hold on to that. You never know what's going to happen, And so that's been a struggle. There was one time, Lee, that I signed a 5-book deal because the offer was just so too hard to turn down. And I regretted it the minute I signed it because I knew I did it for the wrong reasons. And I repented for that. I wrote the 5 books, but now I just do book to book, one book deal at a time. So the good news, I'm grateful. I don't think I've caused any embarrassment to the church through a scandal. The less than good news is that I have struggled some. Yeah. But I have struggled, period, with this stuff.
Yeah. Thank you for that. When you think about all your years in ministry, or maybe just these last numbers of decades in your own personal life, courage, what would you say have been some key moments where you knew you had to call on courage to navigate what you were dealing with?
I think this is a fascinating discussion, especially with you, Lee, because we both come out of the same background, kind of the same stream, so to speak, of the church. I came to discover grace in a personal way because of my battle with alcoholism, and then that time in Brazil. And so grace became personal for me, but then it became public for me. Personal in the sense that I had to trust that God would forgive me and that He has a heavenly destination for me in spite of me, not because of me. And then learning to share that and convey that in South America was truly important. So when I came back to the States, I found myself in a heritage that had not really majored in grace. It was more what we do for God and less what God does for us. And as I began to teach through specifically the book of Romans and discovered even greater levels of grace, I found myself speaking those messages to a church that had never heard that before, never heard it. And I began to get pressure to, how far are you going with this? Are you really saying this? And it was a bit controversial. And by now I'm in my mid-30s, maybe my second year at the church, and I wrote a book called In the Grip of Grace. And I received quite a bit of pushback. And And yet, I think the Lord was kind just to give me a conviction and courage that this resonates with what the Apostle Paul wrote, what the Bible says. So just keep teaching it, keep teaching it. And much to the credit of this church in South Texas, they loved me, and they had to have, we had some honest conversations. We being I with the leaders of the church, but they said, no, if this is your conviction, you teach it. And so I think that was my first uphill battle in trying to be honest with and preach with integrity a message that I had. Many churches did not like it, and I was, taken off the list, so to speak, and that was okay. I really didn't struggle with that. I felt like I was doing what I was called to do.
Yeah. What did that internal process look like for you in coming to terms with, okay, I'm going to be written off by some, and there's a social consequence to this? What's happening with you internally or relationally as you process that?
You ask such great questions, Lee. You ought to do this every week. No, tremendous question. Everybody wants to be accepted. Everybody wants to be loved. I was canceled back before we called it cancel culture. I had some speaking invitations that they reneged on when they read what I wrote, and took that invitation back, and so that was offense. I found myself a bit offended. I never felt, though, like I needed to adapt the message to fit the audience, and I'm not saying that because I was so bold or courageous. It was just not a consideration. And I do think that had my local church pressed back on me, I would have thought, well, maybe I'm off base here. But when I saw the message of grace and the way it changed people's lives, literally, just really changed, that set them free from guilt and shame, and the forgiveness and the joy of not trying to live a life to impress God, but knowing that God's already loved us and impressed with us. I saw what the gospel can do, and so I didn't feel any hesitation to press forward. And it didn't. So what if I don't get an invitation to speak at a men's retreat in Arkansas? That's okay.
Thank you for that. So let me turn to a kind of second major consideration I'd like to talk about for at least a little bit, and that is I was struck by an opening line from a story by NPR, National Public Radio, that opened with this, quote, Pastor Max Lucado is a prominent evangelical pastor and a prolific best-selling writer who almost never writes about politics, end quote. And so I would like to talk about the challenges behind, quote, not talking about politics, end quote. In 2020, we have the murder of George Floyd, and then all sorts of demonstrations around Black Lives Matter. And my understanding from the San Antonio report recounts that at one local gathering in San Antonio, apparently there were, maybe if I remember correctly, 3,000 people there.
Yeah.
It reads, quote, prominent local pastor and author Max Lucado got down on his knees Sunday in San Antonio to beg forgiveness for his and his white ancestors' acts of racism and inaction. And then they quote you. I am sorry that I've been silent. I am sorry that my head has been buried in the sand. My brothers and sisters are hurting, and I am sorry. I have made them to feel less than. I did not help. I did not hear. I did not see. I did not understand, end quote. This seems to be another kind of significant moment where you're coming to terms with the fact that there's potential dangers in saying we're not going to talk about politics. So any commentary on that of how you see that being important at that moment? Yeah,
2020, again, right in the middle of the COVID and then the explosion with the George Floyd murders. There were a group of pastors in San Antonio, African-American pastors, who began meeting to pray about the right response. And they sent the invitation out to all pastors to come and pray with them. And only 2 or 3 of us came. I went to that luncheon. I began going to this weekly luncheon with these primarily African American pastors, uh, to, to try to understand where this wounding came from. And I was struck by the depth of the hurt. Let me illustrate it like this. One pastor in particular turned to me. It was during an open mic time, right? But there are only 3 white guys there and 18 or 19 African-American pastors. And one of them turned to me in that public gathering, and he said, do you have any idea what it's like to be a middle schooler in a classroom and studying American history and opening the history book to see a picture of the back of a slave where the whip has left a spider web of scars. And while the rest of the class says that's part of history, I have to say that's my ancestry. Why did they do that to my ancestors? And that was the moment for me, Lee. And that's why when I prayed that prayer, I said, I think I've had my head in the sand. Never dawned on me that a person might have that visceral reaction to that picture as a middle schooler, your junior high kid in a history book. And I realized, yeah, I think I've spent decades being unaware. And that was, I can't say that I have become, well, I will say this. We did then host a citywide gathering, a prayer gathering. And I invited that particular, it was during COVID, so it was outdoors, everybody sitting in their cars wearing masks. And we had a platform and we had a speaker system set up. But I invited that pastor and I prayed with him there, and I asked him for forgiveness. Now, many of your listeners might think this is a bit odd, but I believe in spiritual warfare, and I believe that there is an ancestry of hurt that gets passed down from generation to another. And so when I apologized, there's not a time in my life that I've taken a whip to a person, ever. But if I could somehow break that chain spiritually, maybe a demonic presence, by praying and publicly announcing, I'm sorry from my ancestry to your ancestry, I'm so sorry, then I'll do it. I'll do it. Because what that person has inherited and what they're carrying is heavy in their life. And the least I can do is acknowledge and own that my ancestry contributed to your slavery.
So I'm reminded, listening to you tell those stories, I recently interviewed a very prominent social media influencer who does a lot on government. And the 2 things come up that I want to get your reaction to. One was that she said at one point, she was talking about how she tries to be nonpartisan but not neutral. And that she doesn't want to she doesn't believe that any one party has all the solutions, but that doesn't mean she must not speak out about various things that either party has to say. And she said at one point that neutrality favors the oppressor, and that by not speaking out about matters, we make space for the oppressor.
Do you agree with that?
I see many, many cases in which that seems to be profoundly true. Do you?
I think that justice is a challenge in any culture, and I think that neutrality is allowing the kind of the default toward injustice to take over. And neutrality does not have to mean anger. It can just be that deep-seated conviction that we have that the world can truly be a better place, and that part of being a good neighbor is listening and understanding and not diminishing. You read the prayer that I prayed that day, and thanks for bringing that up. I haven't thought about this moment in many years, but that phrase "less than," less than. The fellow who shared that story with me about seeing the middle school textbook, and he said, all my life, I have been made to feel less than, less than. And this guy, by the way, this guy has 2 master's degrees. This guy flew fighter jets in the Air Force. And so here's a very accomplished African-American leader, and who chose later in his life to become a pastor. And so he's accomplished things that I'll never dream of. But even so, he said, I still feel and I live with this sense of less than, which is tragic, heartbreaking. And so praying into that, I felt like was an appropriate thing to do.
So just a couple more things on this topic, if I may. This guest that I was interviewing that I alluded to a moment ago, another thing that she shared was that she's a Christian, and we talked about her being a Christian, but she talked about how her experience, she's become such a phenomenon on social media that she gets just thousands of messages daily. And she is on the receiving end of a lot of death threats, and a lot of times kind of vile sorts of reactions. And she said that her experience by and large is that those sorts of vilification, vile, profane language, and death threats, she said, doesn't come from secularists. It doesn't come from Catholics by and large. It doesn't come from mainline
I don't
Protestants.
like where this is going.
It comes from evangelicals.
Yeah, I know.
And she said, and then she said this, it comes from evangelicals who often like to show on their social media profile publicly that they are believers. What's your reaction to that, or what's your thoughts on that?
The religion of the day of Christ is what nailed him to the cross, right? It was the superiority. We call it Pharisaism. They were the Pharisees, and they elevated themselves over. They positioned themselves as the moral police in the days of Christ. And when Christ did not kowtow to their understanding of what the religion should be doing, when Christ, forgave the woman caught in the act of adultery, when Christ hung out with, tax collectors and sinners, they hated that about him. And I think religiosity is a form of superiority in which we position ourselves over a culture in the name of God. And I think that's what nailed Christ to the cross. And I think that is something that we as believers have to be on that we have to be on guard about. But I don't know how well we succeed.
Your new book.
Okay.
You got a new book?
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. I was delighted to see this because I think that your book seems to be around what I would call the good news of neuroplasticity. Is that fair?
That is. Yeah. That is. That's a great word, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a great word. So what got you into writing and thinking about thinking?
Well, you serve on a college campus, and you see the statistics that adolescents are battling anxiety and depression to a degree, seems like any other time since we've been measuring this. My book quotes a statistic that says 42% of adolescents would say they live under a pervasive cloud of dread or anxiety. That's terrible, isn't it? 4 out of 10.
Heavy.
Yeah, very heavy. And 22% have contemplated suicide in the 6 months prior to the survey, which is just tragic. I just happened to be reading that article one day as I was sitting in a fast food place, and in walked about 10 or 12 college-age kids. And I thought about that statistic, 4 out of 10, 2 out of 10, 4 out of 10 dealing with anxiety and depression, 2 out of 10 having contemplated suicide. And I thought, these kids, look at them. That means that 4 out of 10 of those, they're carrying much more than their backpacks. They're carrying a real heaviness. And 2 out of 10 have really battled it to a severe degree. That's what got me interested in this whole topic, Lee. And so I've decided to present a series of messages to our church that would fit under the big umbrella of mental health. And I tried to articulate some tools that people could use. And the result has become this book called Tame Your Thoughts.
What would you see as kind of some of the key takeaways from what you tried to describe there?
Yeah. I don't know why it seems to me to be a new idea to many people, and that is you can really manage your thoughts. You really can. As I've communicated or had conversations with people about this particular topic, there is a sense in which when I say, well, just try to practice picky thinking. That's my favorite phrase. And my subtext is just because you have a thought, you don't have to think it. And that strikes people as a bit new, a new idea. You mean I don't have to think this thought? I can interrupt it? And the phrase in the Bible is take every thought captive. And yet most people are not acquainted with that language. And so I just call it practice picky thinking. And when you have these thought patterns that come your way, try to interrupt them quickly. Your brain is a bit, like the sit room at the White House. It's where you got to have protect any outside influence, and so that healthy and good decisions can be made. And so this whole idea of practicing picky thinking is one of my favorite topics.
Yeah. I mean, I do that we have discussed this topic with a lot of different guests from a lot of different angles on No Small Endeavor. But it does seem to me that this capacity that we have to observe ourselves thinking is something like a superpower that we just have so little paid attention to. And it's remarkable that I can really begin to say, oh, my mind is giving a lot of attention to X, and then to develop the capacity not to continue to feed energy into the loop around X.
Yeah.
And to spin up something else over here.
I think it's a fascinating topic, and I agree. I think we all have a proclivity to a certain type of toxic thought, and identifying what that particular toxic thought is and interrupting it on a regular basis is one of the healthiest things we can do for ourselves.
What's it look like for you when you're trying to interrupt given thoughts, toxic thoughts? What's it actually look like for you? Or how do you do that?
Yeah. Let's say that I take offense at what somebody says about me. Let's say somebody listens to this wonderful program and they send me an angry text because of what I said. I will. This is very real. I mean, I had an article published 3 days ago on Fox News on their website, and then people are allowed to write comments about that article. And the very first one said, "Is this a slow news day?"
Ouch.
And well, dadgummit. I mean, what do you have to do? It was kind of a kind article, And then somebody else said, out of all the Christian writers, Lucado is not my favorite. Why did they have to say that? So obviously it doesn't bother me because I've completely forgotten. Here I am still talking about it 3 days later. So criticism. Here's a fascinating statistic: 4 out of 5 thoughts, according to the Cleveland Clinic. Number one, we have 70 thoughts a day, and 4 out of 5 of those tend to be critical or negative.
We have how many?
We have 70,000 a day.
70,000 per day.
70,000 a day. Most of them are random, insignificant. Yeah. It's cold outside. One more to have for dinner. They don't matter much. But of those 70,000, 4 out of 5 tend to be negative or critical.
Yeah, that just feels overwhelming, doesn't it?
Staggering. Can it be that bad?
Yeah.
Are we the nation of Eeyore? Do you think that's an overstatement in your experience?
I mean, it certainly. I certainly have had plenty of seasons in my life where I would say, yeah, I can see that being the case for me.
Yeah.
I wonder. I mean, did you come across any sort of study that indicate whether or not that sort of statistic is socially or culturally bound? I mean, are there places where 1 out of the 5 thoughts is critical?
Yeah, we would love to say that the particular city in which we live, we have more positive thoughts than others. I've not found anything like that, Lee, that would attribute it to everything that I read was pretty much across the board.
Yeah. So here you are in
but it did focus on teenagers and adolescents as those who battle with it the most. Go ahead.
So when you're in that sort of frustration, offense at the tackiness, what do you do with it?
I have gotten better at that. I mean, I'm 70 years old now, so I've really, it does, I think my skin is a lot thicker. But I do get that just kind of irritating. Oh, why do you have to do that? That kind of thought. But I don't dwell on it. There was a time I would have dwelled on it, but I have come to learn to talk to myself. Yeah, talk to my soul. I practice self-talk, and I say, oh, well, who cares? At the end of the day, I did what I was supposed to do. So I'll give myself a little talk, and I feel like I'm pretty good about moving on. Now, if that criticism had come from my wife, or somebody whose opinion I respect, that's a whole different matter.
Right.
But this kind of public social media criticism that we get, anybody who's going to say anything is going to have engender a reaction from someone. Yeah.
What's your suggestions on cultivating joy, on the other hand?
Yeah.
If we've got all this critical kind of stuff going on, what does it mean not only to reduce the amount of critical negative stuff that we're dealing with, but on the other hand, to foster joy?
Yeah. I see life through a Christian worldview, and my worldview it stabilizes me, I think, to help me have access to joy. The worldview is that God made me, God loves me, God is watching over me, and God is someday going to come for me. Yeah, I believe that. And I believe that if I did not have that worldview, then it might be more challenging to face the future. We just had these horrific floods in South Texas, as you know, horrific floods, lost the lives of so many children. And I had the opportunity to talk to some of the parents who lost their children. And I was stunned by the faith of some of these parents and the power of faith to help them, even though the pain is deep and will last for the rest of their lives, to be able to say, as one couple did to me, we're holding on to our faith and we believe God is holding on to us. I just was stunned by the ability. Their little 6-year-old daughter, got swept up in a Guadalupe River flood and drowned. But they're saying we're holding on to their faith. So that Christian worldview is empowering them, the fact that they believe in a God and they believe that God is good and that God is coming for them, is giving them strength, not making it easy, but it's giving them strength. That to me is a good definition of joy. Joy is not this feeling of being in a good mood, but it's more of a deep conviction that everything's going to work out all right, ultimately. And that's what I have found as a result of attempting to be a follower of Christ. The supernatural presence of the Holy Spirit inside me helps me to have that deep conviction that things are going to turn out okay. Doesn't mean things are going to turn out okay immediately. It doesn't mean things are not going to be painful, because they are. I really think the Bible says that life is short and life is hard. That's pretty much it. It's short and it's hard, but it's going to be great. It's going to be great. So that's my definition of joy.
Other particular practices for that practicing the picky thinking, redirecting? How else might you suggest that folks specifically lean into that?
Some time ago, I developed this little tool, and it's certainly not original with me, but the way I say it might come across as unique. I call it UFO. In the U and the F and the O. We're not talking about what happens in Roswell, New Mexico here, but we're talking about an untruth that leads to a false narrative that leads to an overreaction. An untruth leads to a false narrative that leads to an overreaction. One of the most crucial parts of picky thinking is determining what's true. What's true? I may see you looking at me, and I'm thinking, well, Lee doesn't like me today. Well, I don't know if that's true or false, but it's an assumption that I make. It's an untruth. And that leads to a false narrative. I don't think I'm going to hang around Lee anymore because I see this. He has this, when he looks at me, I can just see he doesn't like me. Well, that leads to an overreaction. That means next time I see another person, hey, Lee doesn't like me, and he's critical. It's just a blatant overreaction. As a young pastor, I was always dealing with people's overreactions, right? Their angry outbursts, their addiction to chemicals, their mistreatment of people. Now I've come to see that rather than always deal with behavior, why don't you back it upriver a bit and try to find the belief that's creating that behavior? What's going on? And odds are they have accepted an untruth. I see that one more example of this, and I'll shut up. But I see this a whole lot with people who struggle with materialism, which we all do to one degree or another, right? But if I buy into an untruth that says I am as valuable as I look, as my appearance, well, that's a lie. But it is a truth that many people embrace. Then that untruth will lead to a false narrative that says my goal on earth is to look as good as I can, right? So I'm going to buy clothing. I'm going to do things to my body to make it bigger or smaller, whatever I need to do to be acceptable. That will lead then to the overreaction of maybe going into debt, charging too much with my credit card, doing things to my body that hurt my body, obsessing myself with particular fashions. And so rather than deal just with that overreaction, let's go back to the very beginning and find what is the untruth that you're listening to. And in this case, we could change that untruth into a truth. You're loved by God. You're cherished by God. So the right narrative for your life is no matter how I appear, I still matter. And that can lead to a healthy reaction and a healthier outlook on life.
Yeah.
UFO.
Yeah. UFO.
Clever, huh?
Yeah. Thinking, identify the UFOs.
Yeah.
There's one more in the toolkit.
One more. And that one's called uproot and replant.
Okay.
I'm all about metaphors, right?
Yes.
So I tell the story in the book about at the age of 12, my dad put me in charge of the lawn one summer. Too young to get a job, but I could be in charge of cutting the grass. But we had grass burrs everywhere. Grass burrs. That's what we call them in West Texas, stickers.
Oh, yeah.
They grow on a stalk, and you can literally tomahawk people with them because they're about 6 inches tall, and they're a bunch of cluster of stickers.
Wicked little
yeah. You never want to fall into a patch of grass burrs when you're playing baseball. And so Dad wanted me to get rid of them. And so I got the lawnmower, and I cut them down. And then they were back a week later, and he realized, I don't think I've taught you, son, how to do this. And so he got a garden spade and got me a garden spade, and out we went, spent the better part of a Saturday digging them out one by one. I think our minds are a bit like that lawn, and we get these stickers that grow up, and we have to get this serious about extracting them. So I call that uproot. Now, that's not novel. I mean, there's so many different lines of thought to talk about emptying your mind. I think more unique to the Christian approach would be that we really try to practice replanting. Instead of just emptying our mind and being void of thought, we want to extract the negative thought, but replace it with truth. And here's where scriptures are really helpful. As we embrace Scripture as God's Word to help us, I can extract that thought that says I'm not worth anything, and I can replant, and I can meditate on particular Scriptures that might say nothing can separate us from the love of God, and just say that. It becomes my mantra over and over all day long. And so the healthy thinker is constantly saying, I'm not going to think that because that's going to lead to an overreaction. I'm going to uproot that, and I'm going to replant with a particular passage or teaching or concept that will help me.
Which, any particular mantras there that you regularly find yourself going back to?
Again, you ask great questions. Yes, I do. My particular I have a variety of toxic thought patterns that will come at me. But one is I tend to assume the worst before believing in the best. I just think, oh man, I bet that flight's going to be late today, or I bet that review of the book is going to be negative. So
it must have been a slow news day.
I make my list of authors. Lucado's not my favorite, but I'm over that. I've moved. I don't even think about that anymore. So I'm aware, though, Lee, that I tend to assume something bad is going to happen. Maybe you could psychoanalyze that too, So I have learned that there are 2 or 3 go-to verses that really help me. One's from Genesis 50:20, the great words of Joseph. What was intended for evil, God used for good. And I say that to myself because I do think there is an evil force on the planet, and he does intend to hurt us. But God can take that and turn it into something good. And then the great Romans 8:28, all things work together for good for those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So on my good days, if you could hear my mind, I am stating those passages as I'm in between appointments, as I'm driving, I'm listening, and I'm talking to myself using that truth, because I have found if I can plant that seed of truth, it'll result in a fruit that is, well, it won't be a grass burr. You didn't have grass burrs in Alabama?
Well, I see them very clearly in my mind, and I don't know that if I remember them from Alabama or my own time in West Texas. But I definitely, you don't forget them once you've encountered them. Once they've stuck to you, you don't forget them.
That's right.
Any last closing encouragement for, let's imagine somebody is thinking, yeah, I've got that toxic thinking. Any last bit of encouragement of how they might take a first step forward?
Well, I do think the way our brains are made, we use that word neuroplasticity. It just tells us that our brains are not chunks of concrete, but they're more like malleable putty that can really change. They truly can change. And that neuroscience is telling us that when a person determines that they are going to be a better thinker, within a matter of 10 minutes, the brain is already reshaping, and that new habit, they call them ruts, those furrows in our brain through which the synapses pass, those are being formed. And so I find that so encouraging. I don't have to have the same outlet. I talked about my wife and her battle with depression. It took several months, and she still has to keep an eye out, but she knows the signs. She can tell when she's about to slide into a dark time. And so she takes initiative. She watches out. She'll get better rest. She'll reach out to some friends. What she's doing, she's protecting her mind, and she knows her proclivity. I know my proclivities, and there's probably a few I haven't confessed yet. But I'm very encouraged that, and I'm very confident, and I'll close with this, very confident to tell people, you don't have to be the same person tomorrow that you are today. You don't have to be. And this is a promise that comes from the Bible. But even if you disregard the Bible, if you have a whole different worldview, don't give up on yourself. Just keep believing that good can happen, and I believe it will.
Been talking to best-selling author Pastor Max Lucado about his newest book, Tame Your Thoughts, as well as his life and his work in the world. Max, thank you so much for your generosity with your time today, and we're very grateful.
It's my honor. And again, terrific job.
Thank you very much. Our thanks to all the stellar team that makes this show possible. Christy Bragg, Jacob Lewis, Carrie Harmon, Jason Cheesley, Sophie Byard, Kate Hayes, Mary Evelyn Brown, and Audrey Griffith. Our theme song was composed by Tim Lauer. Thanks for listening, and let's keep exploring what it means to live a good life together. No Small Endeavor is a production of Tokens Media, LLC, and
Great Feeling Studios.